Hey there, so I'm finally putting together a tutorial for Adobe Illustrator, specifically geared towards making things that can be used with a laser cutter. I'm going to be working on making a dark mark from Harry Potter, because it's something that I've been almost making for a while now, and then I just keep kind of forgetting and putting it off. So I'm hoping to demonstrate a bunch of different techniques here that I use fairly regularly in Illustrator, and that I find particularly useful. First, I'm going to demonstrate image trace because it's the quickest and fastest way to convert a bitmap graphic into vector. But it's also important to understand that it's not only not perfect, it's often totally insufficient, so I'll also be showing you how I make things manually. So a laser cutter has two modes. It's got vector and it's got raster. Now when you've got something that's vector, it's lines that have been explicitly created by a computer with angles and points and stuff, and a computer knows what to do with these lines, and it can draw around them. So basically the laser can follow that line exactly. When you've got a raster image, the laser is literally going back and forth, left to right, left to right, left, right, and it's just off, 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 on, off, 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 and then it goes back and it does again, off, 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 on, off, and it just back and forth. Very slow, very tedious. It's the slowest thing that a laser cutter can do. If you're doing big filled-in surfaces, that's basically your only option. You have to have a raster because it goes back and forth. But if you want lines, like say you wanted to trace around this, or say you wanted to cut this out, you would have to put lines around it, which doesn't work if all you've got is a bitmap image that you downloaded off of the internet. Doesn't do squat. Now, another thing that's important to realize is that a laser cutter is only on and off. It does not have grayscale in between. So basically, you've got full power and you've got no power. That's it. Full power, no power. Now, if you want grayscale transitions or gradients, you can do stuff with dithering. Now, dithering is where there's a bunch of little dots. You know, if you've ever seen stippling in art class or anything like that, where it's a bunch of dots that make it almost gray. So it's kind of an illusion of gray. So you could do that with a laser cutter, but it's really tedious and you got to find tools to get it set right. And that's just not the greatest way to do things. See, some laser cutters actually have software that supports doing multiple passes where you can take a grayscale image, import it into your software, and it'll generate a series of pictures where it's a step, where it's a series of black and white pictures. So it would have a solid black and all white, and then it would have solid black and all white and solid black, and it would just be kind of gradiated, and the laser would actually do it in passes, where it would do one pass where it's literally doing the on and off, and it does this section, and then it does on and off, where it includes the next section, and on and off, and each time it would lessen its power, but also because it's going over this section repeatedly, this would get darker and darker. It'd also get deeper. So that's how you get depth with a laser cutter. And it really just depends on what laser cutter you've got, how powerful it is, what kind of software you're running. Lots of different options. I generally don't bother going that extensive. So anyways, what I'm going to show you here is basically how to take a black and white image that you've downloaded off the internet or made some other software and convert this into vectors so that there's lines around it. Now, there are two ways to do this in Illustrator. One is just straight up here, image trace, make, and it just does it. And it's great, and that actually is pretty acceptable. A lot of times, just straight up image trace works really well, but there's no settings. You can't change anything. You can't make any adjustments doing that. Now, the other way to get to image trace is under Window, and then you go all the way down here to image trace, and this time it brings up a nice little window with settings. Now, if you're doing things with color, these are where you try and do things. You can actually do some settings with color here, and it'll try and do its little calculation. But what we're doing here, black and white, so especially since we're using a laser cutter, is just black and white. Use the black and white preset. Now, the only thing here you really want to bother with is threshold, because you can change this. You can make it less and more and adjust things. So I'm actually going to go with more. That gives us bigger pieces here. Now say I'm cutting this out. So like this shape gets cut out. I want this connection here so that the floating stuff on the inside doesn't just break and fall apart. But this doesn't seem to have any vector lines around it. What's this deal? So we still need to go to Object and Expand. And we hit OK. And now we've got little lines. But we've still got all of this stuff, and it's like, well, what do I do? How do I change this? What's this thing right here? We don't want any of that stuff. So we go over here, and this is this object right here in the layers of Adobe Illustrator. It doesn't work the way layers do in Photoshop. If you've used Adobe Photoshop before and you expect layers to work the same way they have before, you're going to be, disappointed, because it does not work anything like that, and it will confuse you and frustrate you. So just accept the fact that this is not going to work the way you expect it to. This thing right here, let's go ahead, Object, Ungroup. We also need to Object and release the compound objects, because everything that's compound, it won't let us adjust stuff. Now, I don't need this thingy here. It's still doing it. There's a whole bunch of groups, and you just keep going until it actually releases everything. Now see, now we've got individual paths, which is way more useful. You can actually adjust stuff. So I can select things by themselves now instead of only selecting the whole thing all at once. Anyways, get rid of that. In fact, I'm going to select all of these, because these are just white. Every one of these is just like a white filler space. Like this thing right here, it's still there. I don't want that there, but it's still there. We're going to select all of the white and delete it. Now it looks like, problem. This thing here, this thing, I'm intending to just have this be outlines. I'm not filling. Now if I was doing raster and still filling, I would not have bothered with that particular part. I would have left it as a compound object. But all I want right now are the lines, because this is what the laser will trace, because I'm cutting this out. Just the lines. That's all I want. Now another thing, now this might vary depending on your laser cutter and your software, but in my case specifically, I always have to set this to 0.25, the thinnest that the line will go. Because if it's set thicker, the laser actually thinks that it needs to go over it more than once. It will trace over this line like 3 times if it's set to 1, versus only going over it once when I have it set down to the lower thing right there. So you'll need to know your software and your idiosyncrasies. And honestly, you just learn those things through trial and error. You work them out after you've done it a while. But right now, this right here would be totally set. I could just take this into the laser cutter and it would cut this shape out. Now one thing that I could do with something like this is I would maybe do 2 layers of wood. I would have a back, I could like cut it out from something like this. And on this first layer, I would, let's set that to invisible. That's what this is, by the way. If it's the white thing, it's invisible. If it's not, it's solid. We don't want that. Invisible. This one is the fill, and this one is the stroke. So this is the outside line. So right now it's red. And that's another thing that I encounter with my laser cutter, and I have no idea if it'll be the same with your laser cutter. On mine, the software pays attention to line colors. So usually I just default to red as a cut because it's easier for me just to keep track of things. So say on this one, I would have all of the skull set to blue and the outside set to red. It'll cut this line, it'll draw these lines, and I would cut that guy out, and this would be the back layer. And then for the second layer of wood, I would go ahead and cut out this guy. So I'd go ahead and switch that over to red. It would cut these shapes out. Then I could take these shapes as a second layer of wood and glue them on top of the first layer, and that would get you some really neat depth. You could paint the back just solid black, you could paint the front bits white, and you'd have yourself a really neat little wooden thing that has some depth. And it was pretty darn easy to do because you had the pieces drawn on the bottom layer because it drew those lines, so you know where to put them, and it's just like a puzzle, and you just put the things where they belong. So that's one way that I could do something like this. Now let's say we weren't keen on just copying someone else's drawing of a dark mark, and we wanted to come up with our own. So I grabbed some references off of the internet, and we are going to show you how to use the pen tool. Because if you've never used a pen tool before, or any kind of vector drawing tool before, it is just really kind of weird, and it takes some getting accustomed to. Now, first thing, all of these guys, these graphics that I downloaded, these are on this layer. You can tell because it's got a little dot here. You know, when you've got something selected, it will put a little dot right next to it. If you have it expanded, you can specifically see which one it is. Like this guy right here is this. See? Selected, not selected, right? Now, when I am drawing vectors on top, I don't want to keep selecting this thing on accident because that gets really tedious. I want to stay on this layer and not mess with this layer. So, lock it. That's a lock. Now I can't select these guys. I can't do squat to them. They are stuck the way they are, and I am on a new layer for drawing. Now, because this is really dark, let's go ahead and get a lighter color, but I don't want to go with white. Let's go with like red. So we've got red. Now, if you just click, 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 you get straight lines, right? If you click and drag, you get curves. You get these anchors. There's two different arrow tools. This one is a whole object, selects the whole darned objects. You can't edit squat except for like, you know, scale. You can scale stuff and you can rotate stuff, but you can't edit the points. You want to edit the points, you go to the little white arrow instead. Now you can select the points, you can move them around. Now in this version of Illustrator, in the newer versions, you get this. This didn't used to be here. I love it. I'm glad they added it. Select a single point. You can use that little anchor dealy there, and you can change that. That's great. You can also do multiple at a time. Look at this. Look at that. Isn't that awesome? So you can also take, like, say we've got a square and we want to make these corners rounded. Just pull them in. It's great. I love that they added this. It's great. Now say I only wanted to do 2 of them. I didn't want the bottom to curve in. I just select those 2. Remember, we're using this arrow. Just select those 2. Pull the arrow anchor thingy. Curves them in. That's really neat. I love that they added that because it didn't used to be that way. So anyways, back to the pen tool. Let's say we go like this. We're just kind of going around. We just click, drag, click, drag. Now let's say I wanted to go up here. Now see how we've got this curve because the anchor goes up. I don't want that right there. Hold down the Alt key. Changes your cursor to this. Click on that guy. Gets rid of that. Now I could go from a straight angle. Let's say I go here, make a little curve, go down. I want to do it again. I don't want this curvy here. Hold down the Alt key, click, gets rid of it. Now I can do this again. Do that. Do this again. Go in there. So we get that going on, which is pretty darn handy, honestly. So we go around, coming up. All right, now I'm just aiming for, like, we're getting the cheekbones. We got the cheekbones here. We're going up to the eye thing. This thing right here, I really wanted to get that. Now let's stop there. Now the question is, do I want to just keep that shape alone? Because I think I could just stick with that and then go up and like ignore all of this stuff in the back. I think I'm going to be ignoring that. We're just going to see how it looks. If it doesn't look quite right, I'll go ahead and add in that depth stuff. Let's do this, maybe about there. Let's see how that looks. We're going to turn this guy off so we can't see it. I think maybe I'd tweak this up a little. Anyways, let's add in the eye sockets. Go up and down. And then when we connect, see how it changes to that little circle thing. If you hold down the Alt key again here and click and drag, it will only affect the anchor on this side. It won't mess with that. Now let's say we didn't do that. say we just clicked, it didn't do anything. See how now it tweaks both sides. So say you don't want to mess with this angle. You want that to stay exactly the way it is, but you still want to be able to control this. Hold down the Alt key, click here, then you can control that anchor point. Let's go ahead and do the nose. This time I'll go ahead and let it change that. Now let's say we wanted to mirror this really well. We didn't want to draw this again. We just want to copy this guy over. So copy, paste, and to mirror it, go up to Object, Transform, Reflect. Open that up, we get a little window. We want vertical mirroring in this one. Pops it around. There we go. So let's go ahead, turn this guy off, see what we got. It's not too bad. Now, of course, this is drawn. These aren't for cutout. If we were doing a cutout, I wouldn't have this whole thing going on here. That doesn't work so well. I want solid shapes if you're wanting to cut something out. Let's see. If we want to bother, we could go ahead and do some of this. Let's see what that looks like. Or if we actually need to shape those. I think it's better to not add too much detail around teeth. A lot of times when you see drawings of things where the teeth look really awkward, they benefit from just not including nearly as much detail. You leave out detail and it actually reads better. Alright, that's not too bad. Now, I haven't really been showing these. This guy, I use this all the time, the Navigator. Zoom in, zoom out, all that. And of course you can move around. So I always have that open. If you don't see that when you open up Illustrator, it's under Window and Navigator. That pops this guy up. I always have one of these around just because it's easier to get around. And of course, layers. Layers are super important. So let's say we want a snake like this. Now let's say we did want to make this a cutout so that it's not a drawing, a traced drawing, but actually something that would be cut out as a solid. In that case, we'd go ahead and get rid of these. I should probably demonstrate what I just did there. Okay, so I selected this guy. Another time where the Alt key comes in handy, you hold down the Alt key while you're going over this and click and drag and it will make a duplicate. Alt key does all sorts of stuff. So I made a duplicate. Anyways, if I'm making this a solid shape that could be cut out or filled in, let's get rid of those guys. Now here, this right here, this is the scissor tool, right? Say I click right there. Now I've split this. I could get rid of this guy. Let's say I want to connect these two. Click from that to that. Just connected them. Pretty simple. Let's see. Now in this case, I want to keep this shape. I want to keep the cheekbone and the forehead, the forehead part. Anyway, so I'm going to get rid of this side. Let's go ahead and connect these two. Now we got all sorts of weird little lumps, although when we're using a skull, lumps aren't necessarily a bad thing. Tweak some of this, maybe even move this up. Move this guy over, maybe round him out a little. See, now we're getting some kind of interesting shapes going on here, where it's a skull, but it's exaggerated. We used reference to start, but there's no harm in adjusting things. Now, another thing, okay, see this guy right here. This is the pencil tool, right? Say you've got something selected. You start on the line, but change it a little, but end on the line, and it'll actually adjust it. It'll move it to where it is. Now, if I say I went like that, it's connected, but it's weird. It doesn't know what to do with that. If let's say I had a line doing that, right? Make sure it's selected. Go like that. Ooh, completely gets rid of all that stuff, right? So say I wanted to do this, but I didn't quite connect it right. There we go. But if I want to make sure, I go into it, and you can adjust things that way. Whee! And then you get all sorts of strange stuff. Anyways, but since this guy is solid, it could be filled. Now, say we wanted to be able to raster this. We wanted to make this black and white, and we would raster it and fill it so it's filled in. Now say I filled this guy in, I go with the fill instead of the trace. We can't see the eyeballs, right? So that's not what we want. If you select these guys, make them a compound mask. There we go. It knows that they're a part of it and they're on the inside, so they're empty. And it does that. See, you can see through it, it's actually cut out. Now, another way that you could do that, instead of a compound mask, was like, you know, say you guys have these guys and you fill them in with white, and this guy's filled in. That works the same way, in theory, except you don't see through it. It's not part of it, it's just kind of faked. So it's really what you want. Now, I mean, in the end, both of those versions would come out the same in a raster on the laser cutter. There would be dark, there would be light. It doesn't really care if you've got a compound shape or if you're just filling stuff in. But I do have problems with my laser software, specifically if I've got shapes that are filled in and that it doesn't quite understand. It imports them in strange ways. I get weird artifacts. So I've just gotten in the habit of trying to make things as clean as possible, specifically because of some of the weird problems that I get sometimes. So that's why I go to extra links to make things clean. I hope you will forgive my tendency towards that. Anyways, let's say we're also going to fill in this. We're aiming for solid shapes on this guy. So instead of tracing it exactly, what I'm aiming for here is finding the dark shapes. So I'm going to fill in the black part of the mouth. Around the outside. We'll see how well that reads, or if I need more detail in there. I see. Now here's a good example. Sometimes it just doesn't quite work, right? I find it's best to undo and just try and find the best point to have that curve. So you got your curve here. Let's get a curve about there. And that's good. See, it takes practice to judge where the anchor points will get you the best results. That's really all it is. It just takes practice. And there's a lot of undo, a lot of, starting over. But once you get the hang of it, it's a lot simpler. Because, vector lines, paths are just kind of strange. And they aren't very intuitive for some people. But once you get the hang of it, it's not so bad. See, now I think that reads pretty well. Let's see, do I want to get any? Nah, I'll leave it at that. So, for this guy, let's say we would have these shapes cut out. Yeah, that reads pretty well. I think it does anyways. Maybe a little bit of something in there. Let's see how that looks. Yeah, that reads really well. I think that's a good shape right there. Okay, so we're going to have that. We're going to have this. Oh, we still need this fancy shape going on here, the big swirly bit. Now, for that, I want to show you a really neat trick that was also added not too many versions ago, I guess. I mean, it's been around a little while at this point, but let's just show you. Okay, helps if it's not like that. All right, so in this case, I'm not going to trace the whole body. Let's just get the shape of the path of the whole darn snake as a single thing. Alright, so we've got this really tiny little line here, right? Let's make it thicker. Let's go something, you know, that's too much. Down. Anyways, we're just working. So we've got this path. This right here, the width tool, is super duper handy. I love this thing. It didn't used to be here. Well, I mean, it's like I said, it's been around a little while, but when I found it for the first time, I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. This is so much easier than what I used to do, which was way more tedious. But yeah, so you adjust your thing. Let's try and get our paths a good size in shape. Now let's say this would start out a little bit wider than that, and helps if I'm... Alright, so find it. Let's pull it wider there, but maybe more narrow down here. I move that over there. So we got all this. All right. That is the basic shape, right? So we take this guy and we want to actually make it into an outline shape, not just this one line here, because a laser cutter wouldn't know what to do with this. It wouldn't do squat with this. It'd be like, what? I don't even know. What? So go to Object, Expand Appearance. That does this to it. I also want to, while I'm on this, I want to show you some things. Now say we've got a circle that is like that, and another circle, and maybe even a line. And let's make all of these quite a bit thicker. And say we wanted to make that into a shape. Now if we just went to expand, and it's got all these lines between. Let's say we wanted it to be one object, right? So have all those selected, object, compound. Make it into a compound object. Then go to expand. And now, no lines in between. It's really clean. This is a super handy way for having something if you want to cut out the shapes. Because we've got these things here intersecting, before it would, it would draw those lines. The laser cutter would draw those lines, even though that's not what we want. We don't want those darn lines. They're kind of crappy. But with this, no more inside lines. So that's a really handy thing to keep in mind. You compound. So we got this guy, right? Now I want to, let's see, I'll go ahead and just pull this up. I want to treat this kind of like Celtic knot stuff. I'm using the scissor tool right here, and I am going to put 2 cuts there and there. And now I've got this guy, delete, this guy, delete. Let's connect those two, except I don't quite like the way that looked. Let's curve it a little. All right, that's better. And those two, you can see what's going on here. So this was in front before. I want it in back now. Since it's in back, it's the one that gets cut. Cut there and cut there. Now I like Celtic knot stuff because it works really well with a laser cutter if you leave gaps, because independent floating bits, they just work well with a laser cutter. Okay, so this was behind, now it's in front. So I cut this bit here, delete these two, and draw here. Fill it, that's what we get. Let's combine these, see what we get. this guy down, bring this guy up, maybe shrink him down a bit. Let's go ahead and make this guy a compound object again so we can fill. Okay, now let's say we do this. Let's cut him up here. Get rid of that lower bit. Let's get this a little bit closer to the shape of the thing below it. All right. Let's see. Now this doesn't entirely work the same way that I would want it to. Fill them. Anyways, so there we go. That's what we've got, which is not too bad. I actually think I'd shrink this guy down. He's too big. And since it's all independent floating bits, each one of these would be cut out. It could be a piece that, you know, you'd throw those out, you'd throw the insides out, or you'd layer them on top of something else, glue it. All sorts of different stuff can be done with this. And that's like if we wanted to not just use this guy, which was totally fine. Just, you know, grabbed him off the internet. I think that's it for now, because, you know, I covered the width tool, which I find super handy. I love that guy. Cut tool is good for cutting things. A few basics on the pen tool, or path, whatever. One other thing I do want to mention, some shortcut keys, because I'm always just using my keyboard because it's just so much faster to use the keyboard. Like say we had a mostly enclosed space and I wanted to cut it off. I wanted to close this and I didn't want to just grab this guy and go from there to there, which is totally an okay thing to do. But you could also just select, and that's holding shift to select two at this, you know, you want to select a bunch of different things. You can select, hold down shift, select different guys. That's like if you want to do this stuff. Select this guy, hold shift, select that guy. I've got 2 points that are open, selected. If I hit Control and J, that connects them. Control J. Also, you know, Apple Command, it's the same damn thing. But yeah, J connects 2 points. A lot of times, like let's say I've got some complicated shape and I've connected a whole bunch of things together and I want to, you know, I've been cutting things. Like let's say I've got this guy over here, right? And I want to cut this shape open. I'll just cut that guy, get rid of that, right? Let's say I've also, just for quickness sake, by the way, the V key switches to the black guy right there, the black arrow. The A key goes to the white one. So V key, select this guy, select that guy. A key switches to the white one, select those two. Command J, select those two. Command J, really quick. And even when they're really close together, like say you're like, oh, whatever, it's close enough. Even if it looks like they're really close together, right? There is a teeny tiny bit of space that is not close together, and the laser will not connect that. And that just might be a little piece of wood that isn't cut, and you'll have to like snap it, and you can get weird little broken off wood bits doing that kind of stuff. So you always want to be careful of that kind of thing. I think that is sufficient for now. I think next time I'm going to go ahead and start covering some of the box layouts, you know, how to actually construct the zigzag bits that I use to connect things together, laying them out, different kinds of shapes, because you know you're not restricted to just boxes. You can also make, you know, trapezoidal shapes and curved things. Yes, wood with curves. All of that stuff is totally possible. I will cover that in another video. I hope this was helpful and that you learned something. And if you've got any more questions, feel free to ask in the comments and I will try to answer them. All right. Thanks, and I am out.